Let's talk about Luffy's leadership style. So, Luffy is an interesting character to be a leader. I think one of the things that sets Luffy apart is that he sort of operates more with vision over a certain type of chain of command or like bureaucracy. His adage, I'm going to become king of the pirates, you might notice that he doesn't give a lot of concrete plans. Luffy's not laying out some big giant strategy, right? His strategy basically starts and ends with that phrase, and it's really more of an emotional appeal than it is a traditional leadership sort of top down thing. Let me explain. Traditional models of leadership often rely a lot on structure, chain of command sequence, some sort of strategic planning, oversight of other people. And Luffy to me represents sort of a charismatic version of an emotional appeal rather than a sort of like being a manager. One thing you notice with Luffy and the crew is he doesn't do a lot of managing his other crew members. He sort of lets them be who they are and pursue their own passions within the crew. To that end, and one thing that I really like about Luffy as a leader is he really lets the specialists be good at what they're good at without him giving his own input, right? He's not going to Nami and trying to give her tips on how to navigate. He's not telling Zoro how to handle combat strategy. Can you imagine Luffy telling Sanji how to cook something? Definitely not. Right? He's like, yes, I got like this awesome cook. He makes the best food. Um, right? Can you imagine Luffy telling Nico that she has some history wrong or that she's misinterpreted something? Right? No, like Luffy lets people be what they're good at, and he relies on that expertise within his crew without being the manager who has to go and put in his 2 cents with everything, especially on topics that he's not the expert in, right? Luffy is the expert in going forward and fighting whoever the big problem person is. That's what he's good at. That's he sticks within his lane, so to speak. I think Luffy relies on a sense of loyalty rather than authority, right? He expects the people in his crew to be loyal to him, but it's not an authority over them in that loyalty. It's an interesting dynamic because when we take the crew members, none of them are particularly above or below Luffy. He sets up a system within his crew where everyone is basically equal in the sense that they can be their own authority within the context of the larger crew and managing whatever obstacle or direction that they might be headed in. So you could say that Luffy's authority is a moral and sort of is a moral authority because he wants to do what's right, and it's also a relationship authority, right? If someone's going to hurt someone he already has trust and loyalty for, that's going to be a problem too. Luffy's core ideology overall, right, is one of freedom, which is interesting in terms of being a leader because a lot of times when we see leaders, there is a sense of authoritarian loyalty that is expected, right? And it's really not in the sense that Luffy is above the other people, like I said before. It's more so that it's a relational kind of authority within the different people, right? And it's not a hierarchy, which is a much more traditional sort of setup. Luffy thinks the king of the pirates is just the most free person in that world. He's not the most powerful, he's not the most wealthy, he doesn't control the largest amount of other armies or pirates or anything like that. And to that end, right, he doesn't try to control his crewmates' dreams. He doesn't he's always encouraging individuals' goals so long as they're not oppressive. And he almost has an overt refusal to dominate others, right? And to use his own power and strength to make others do things, right? He wants people to be themselves, which is really refreshing, I think. A lot of the models of traditional leadership tend to rely on overall organizational goals, um, efficiency, some sort of centralized mission. And that's a really interesting part about One Piece and Luffy in general is that the crew itself doesn't have one big mission, although they're searching for the One Piece, but they're supporting Luffy's dream as they each individually can find their own and pursue their own dream within that context, which is kind of crazy the more you think about it, right? Because Zoro isn't after the One Piece, Nami isn't after the One Piece. They're simply supporting each other within almost a family dynamic as each one pursues their morally just goals within the context of, their journey and their adventures and stuff. Another thing with Luffy, like I said before, is that he always leads from the front. He's not the type of leader, he's not the type of commander, if you will, that's going to sit in the back and strategize and sit around and sort of look at the battlefield and make plans, right? He is going to be in the very front. He's the first one who's going to put himself in danger's way ahead of other people, especially those he cares about, which is really admirable. Another interesting thing about Luffy is that he doesn't really have specific laws or morals that come outside of himself. His moral sense of the world is all internal. And I think this explains a lot of his childishness and his recklessness, particularly like before the time shift and all that sort of stuff. And it's really interesting to see that dynamic play out in this world of pirates and oppression and power seeking. Because what happens, he basically produces within the people around him extreme loyalty, a high sense of morale, and he's successful, right? Sort of against all odds, Luffy is constantly getting W's. In literature term, I've heard this referred to as the charismatic hero or a natural leader, right? In that Luffy doesn't have to sit around and convince people to follow him based on his words, and he just does what he does. He's completely who he is, and as a result, people gravitate towards him, and it's really awesome to see. I think it flips a lot of those power dynamics on their head. In other words, because Luffy embodies conviction and emotional sort of freedom, he becomes a natural leader, right? He doesn't impose leadership on other people. He just is a leader. Look at this guy. Look at his hat. So anyway, that's my rant about Luffy. And sort of studying him and being a newer fan for the last year or so, and really analyzing that kind of that type of character is really interesting to me. So hope you enjoy.